Welcome to this episode of Wanderlust Solo Women Travel Unscripted. Real women, real stories, real journeys, and no filter. Join Gina, your host, to share the experiences and stories of solo female travelers and advocates from all over the world, with a mission to empower women of all ages, backgrounds, and life stages to embrace solo female travel with confidence and enthusiasm, while being authentic and real, unscripted. Confronting the challenges and apprehensions many women face when considering solo adventures, providing inspiration to break through those barriers, sharing how life transitions, loss, and trauma can lead to amazing experiences, rediscovery, and life journeys. The good, the bad, and the ugly of authentic and honest travel. So let's throw out the script, get comfy, and jump right into this episode.
Let's join our guest, Frances Helena. Frances has been a traveller since before she could walk and talk. Her whole life she has been dedicated to learning and understanding the world around her. She now inspires people through her travel writing, her daring adventures and her photography, where she has been published in Marika's magazine, Nature and Travel 2025. Frances continues to encourage people to travel, especially those who have yet to do so. She has merged her love of travel into a global social enterprise with her own fashion humanitarian business, Beautifully Diverse Fashion. Brand aims to create more awareness not only about travel but also about recycling clothing to resell, and dedicates its time to supporting creative individuals and creative businesses to become more successful. Despite her being hearing impaired, she never lets this disability stop her from achieving her goals and her dreams. Hello and welcome everyone to this episode of Wanderlust Solo Women Travel Unscripted. And we have Frances joining us today. It's great to have you here. She is coming to us from Oceania, which is great to have a fellow Anzac, Australia. Please come in and say hello. And it's just wonderful to have you here, Frances. I'm really excited to see where this conversation takes us.
Hi, Miss Gina. Yes, finally someone closer to my time zone.
Yeah, that was one really good thing. Like mostly we've been having guests from the Northern Hemisphere, so it's really nice to have an Anzac here, especially with us just celebrating Anzac Day. But you're a bit of a child of the world, so just do a little quick intro. I've done your bio, which is really interesting, so I just want to touch on some of that. So yeah, tell us, why are you in Australia at the moment?
So I was going to say I'm born and bred here, which technically is sort of true. But I was born in the Philippines, but we're going back more than 30 years ago now. So I'm 35 end of the year. So 35 years ago, a lot of countries didn't have dual citizenship options. So you had to revoke. So my mum was already a citizen since the 70s, Australian citizen, I should say, since the 70s. My mum and dad decided to revoke my Philippine citizenship. So pretty much an Aussie since I was like 3 months old. So yeah, practically Aussie, been out here for more than 20 years now, but we lived all over the world. So I've lived in about 10 different countries now across 4 continents because of my dad's job. By the time I was about 10, ended up living in about 7 different countries. I've now added that on, the extra 3. So yeah, and that's pretty much how we ended up in Australia, really. I guess it was just because of how things were back then, maybe. And I guess, obviously for me personally, Australia, we've got a good system here, government system, there's so many different options if you want to study, that sort of stuff. So I guess that's why we ended up out here. I was pretty much just tagging along, so I don't know. So otherwise, pretty much, yeah, Australia's home. I'm from Townsville originally, which is North Queensland in Australia. So yeah, that's pretty much, but I'm actually in Brisbane at the moment. So yeah, that's pretty much how we end up here.
Of course. So that's just so interesting that you not only travelled, but you've lived in so many different countries. And that sort of leads on to my next question, which is our pass the parcel question from our previous guests. So our previous guest asked, is there part of you that travelled helped you reconnect or rediscover yourself?
Yeah. I guess it depends if it's specifically connected to something, but no, travel for me is always, it's always going to be a part of my life. I mean, I've, pretty much born and bred that way. We moved everywhere. And this is long before technology and apps. I mean, the oldest phone I grew up with was a Nokia phone. So, we're going back to the whole clickety click screen thing. You can throw it against the wall and it works, that sort of thing. Digital, what do they call those? Film canister photos, you got to get them developed. The big camcorders they had on the side with the tapes inside. So we're going back like all the way, and we still even have some of those videos and things. And I think, for us as a family, that was something that really help. Traveling was just really a way to connect with people. And I think that sort of helped me connect with people. Even now, now it's just so technologically advanced. I mean, look at you and I right now, right? We're two different countries. You couldn't do that back in the day. You had to, Skype or MSN or whatever, wait for someone to get off the phone and call them, the dial up, that funny noise, so, the connecting part has always been something that I think has really helped me to just connect with people in general, because I've had that experience, and because a lot of the people I've connected with are people who are from the countries that I've lived in, especially non-English speaking backgrounds, places where not everybody has electricity and water, whereas a lot of the time people think people still have electricity and water. It's like, no, they don't. You don't even have things like a hot running bath, that sort of thing. So it's something that I grew up in, or that I was used to, that I can actually share with other people, and that's how we can actually connect. So I think that's how travel has really connected me that way. And also now, with all this new technology, there's been so many ways to connect with people. You can spend time just talking to somebody for hours. You don't have to know them that long, but I mean, whether it's for business and things. So I think that's been really a way for us to connect with people in that sense.
Yeah, and I just want to make a note there that you're not that old. So, I mean, I can totally relate, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners can totally relate, but you're actually not that old.
No, I'm 35 end of the year, but...
No, it's great. It sort of makes me feel good that someone your age remembers the time of travel without technology, and, that we still managed and we still did these things. Even I struggle to think back. As a child, we all knew to meet up and play. And as we got into teenagers, we all knew how to connect to go to a party. We all stayed in contact, and it's you really got to think hard now. And how did we do that? And the same with navigation. Even when I went in 2011, there's a photo of me and some guys I'd met in Paris because we were lost. And we're all on the pavement with a big map spread out trying to work out where we were, and that was 2011. So it's not that long ago.
Yeah, definitely. I remember just riding in the car with my dad, and he was the main one that drove us everywhere. But I remember just looking in the old map, and you just look at the coordinates, and you had to pull over or something to have a look just to check. Yeah, those were, it's definitely so different now. Even planes itself, the way they're done, the way they're created, even just the information card deck thing. I was like, look, there's a brown person, and people think I'm kidding, man. I said we didn't have a brown person on that deck. I'm not even joking. And now when I look at it, I'm like, doesn't even look like me. Like, it looks so. What is that? But things have changed so much. Even things like smoking. They've got those smoking signs, but now it's vaping and smoking. It's like, okay. So yeah, travel's just changed so much, and yeah, basically, even though, like you said, I'm not that old, but it's, definitely changed.
Yeah, 100%. And, and in your, I'd say short lifespan, you've had some, because you've lived in so many countries, but you've also had quite a diverse range of, I wouldn't say careers, but occupations that you've done. We'll delve into it a bit later on in the episode, but, you've got your fashion, you've got, you work with refugees, you were on an archaeological dig. I want to share a bit more about that. How did you get on an archaeological dig?
Yeah, so my dad is, it sounds funny to even say, but I think even today people don't really mind it. But back then people they sort of have this weird perception of like what your parents looked like. So my dad is actually Caucasian and my mum's Asian, and both of them are very different, not in appearance, but just like the thinking, the mentality. My mum is very cultural, she's very conservative, very religious. My dad's like the opposite person. And he was always like, oh, try this, try that, try new things. And that was sort of where I really got it from, was always just wanted to try something different, see what happens, don't know what this is, just do that. I mean, I went bungee jumping. When I lived in New Zealand, 2 years, I said, oh, I went bungee jumping. I was mortified. And I said, wait a minute, I just paid for this. I'm just going to have to jump off. So I jumped off and I sent a picture to my mum. And she said, you're stupid. Where's your helmet? Why you don't have helmet? Whereas my dad was like, oh, yeah, well, as long as you're having fun, So they're both completely different people. But this archaeological dig, there's a program that was introduced in 2014 to Australian universities called the New Colombo program, which basically is undergraduate university students who are allowed to basically go do their study in another part of the world. So this is mainly for Indo-Pacific. So, the Pacific Islands and parts of Asia. And so we were one of the people, I think the first batch of people who ended up coming out to Laos, or maybe the second bunch, but there was about 8 of us Aussie students from Townsville and Cairns, because we've got, it's called James Cook University. So there's different areas there, different regions of the university, I should say, different cities. I don't even know what I'm saying now, but and we met up with a bunch of Lao students as part of the program. So we ended up doing this. So basically the government funds this program, which now has about 40 different countries that this is eligible for. Yeah. So, and Laos was one of them. So we ended up doing this. Our lecturer is a Kiwi. So he actually ended up on the project, and he speaks Lao. So if you don't speak Lao, and if most people don't know, Lao, like Thai and Cambodian and Chinese, are all tonal. So if you mispronounce some words, you could be insulting someone or saying something wrong, Vietnamese is the same as well. But we all went out here for 3 weeks on this thing. And I always wanted to be an archaeologist. My dad brought me up on Discovery Channel, David Attenborough, the whole 9 yards, that sort of thing. And I ended up doing this. I did archaeology as a course a little bit, and I didn't realize the depth of how it's actually done. It's actually all about numbers. You have to, so you've got like a rectangle, for example, which is the pit, and then you have to keep digging each layer off, peel it all off, and then measure it and draw it. Now, I didn't realize all this, and I was pretty much there, and there were people who were pretty much majored in archaeology helping me. So I was pretty much the one ended up polishing the artifacts. So, but that's how we ended up on this program, really, was through the educational system as part of Australia. And actually the guy is from Australia and the girl is from Laos. They've been married. That program was 2015. So they've been married for that long, actually. And we still can't believe it. We're like, it's been that long since we ended up here. So this program is in, the particular area we were in was called Kwong province, which is like in the middle of nowhere. Like no one else up here speaks any English, So we were lucky our lecturer translated, and there was another Aussie lady who was part of the program. She's been there since she was 21, but she speaks Lao. So, and there was a few other people who were part of the Lao University in Vientiane, which is the capital, who also speak English and Lao, were helping us and everything. And we had to learn the language at the same time. But we basically go up into the countryside. So it's super remote. And yeah, we were up there for 3 weeks. And it's actually super cold because it was winter and it's in the middle of nowhere. But we had a great time. And all the artifacts we found date back to the 17th century. So we were digging at a monk. It was pretty much a monk area. So there's a whole bunch of them that lives there. Obviously they have permission to do all this and check it and everything. But Laos itself has actually, because it's been through a war zone with the Americans, I believe, at the time, but it's had over 2 million bombs dropped on it. And these bombs, I'm talking about like World War I, World War II, if I've got my history correct, but they're massive bombs. They're just bigger than a person. So they had to check them all because some of them are still active. And so we were pretty lucky, but no, we just had an amazing time up there, and that's how we ended up out there. But I encourage anybody to, if you are in a university and you're doing your undergraduate, definitely go and, travel overseas. Doesn't doesn't matter what country you're in, just go and do it. Go see what's out there. And, I'd never been to Laos, so I just sort of picked something and was like, okay, let's go. And, yeah, why not? So, yeah, I've always been that sort of person, just throw myself into the deep end and figure it out.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's just grabbing every opportunity that comes your way. I mean, because you don't know where that door may lead. I mean, and it's like I said, you wear many hats. That's just one thing of many you've done. You've got your fashion side, which I think's really amazing that you've gone into, beautifully diverse fashion. Do you want to share a bit about how that birthed and came about?
Yeah, definitely. So that's basically based off my, inspired by my childhood travels, really, to say that beauty comes in all different shapes and sizes, which it does. When you live in Australia, you live in, Asia, wherever you live, people have this different idea of what beauty should be, And, for example, in Asia, we've been taught that being fairer skin is acceptable. But you can come to Australia and there'll be heaps of, Caucasian ladies wanting to tan themselves to look darker, which is in Asia, which would be completely odd. People are like, why? But, it just really, it varies. Or you can go, I spend a lot of time with a lot of African communities, which is my, background with refugees and asylum seekers. And, a lot of them are on the, what we now call plus size. So they're, very curvy. And that in Africa is like, if you have a lady like that, then that's great. Yeah, pretty much, But we basically, with the brand, was to say that beauty does come in all shapes and sizes. And we wanted people to be just confident in themselves, just be who they are. And a lot of the work we do, because it is a social enterprise now, we work a lot with domestic violence victims, minority groups. So people who haven't had a chance to actually shine in the fashion industry, because in the fashion industry, it's still very, what's the word? What's the word? It's like they've still got an idealistic view of how you should look, which is the skinny, the tall. Yeah. And let's be honest, right? Not all of us are like that. I'm like 5'2" or something. Yeah. So, and a lot of people aren't all skinny. A lot, it's changed so much in the last 30 years. You look at things like Marilyn Monroe, Chanel, all that, and you look at how it's progressed over the years and the changes in food, changes in everything, so it really comes down to all that. But that's sort of how we ended up doing this. Was I became hearing impaired just before COVID. I was living in New Zealand, actually, and the audiologist told me I had already lost 50% in both ears. So I was 25 at the time. And back then we couldn't get enough funding for hearing aids. So hearing aids can cost between $3,000 to $10,000, depending on what you need. Not everybody has that kind of money, but when you lose your hearing, it's one of the main senses. The first set of hearing aids, we raised some money when I came back to Australia. Now there's sort of funding for people my age, where there's a company called Audica fund about $1,000 off, and that which is provided by the government and everything. NDIS, which is National Disability Insurance Scheme, if I've got that correct. But basically they'll provide you some funding and all that sort of stuff directly to the company, like Audica, and then they can just subsidize it, take it off. So we paid the rest off. So I've got rechargeable hearing aids now. So that was $3,000, but still, I can still hear, but there's still some things, I grew up with hearing and I could pretty much hear everything. But this sort of came about during COVID when, everybody lost their job and people didn't know what to do. There was nothing to do. What can you do? So everybody was really trying to, I guess, cope with working online, the whole transition of working online and, people becoming more creative. And so during COVID, someone said to me, "Oh, you design, right?" I said, "Oh, just draw, nothing fancy." And it was actually one of the girls who modeled for New York Fashion Week, because originally I wanted to do modeling because that's what I used to do as a teen in Australia. I was about 19, 20, and I really wanted to start doing that. But then they said, "Oh, apply," and I apply as a designer for New York Fashion Week. So I applied. I didn't expect to get in. And, a couple of years later, here we are. So, since then, we've done New York Fashion Week twice. I've been in a couple of competitions where I'm a finalist. I recently just did a competition where I was one of the 3 finalists for this New York, Sustainability Fashion Week. And then, that's pretty much how we did. And plus, we recycle clothing. So if you don't like your outfit or if you don't like something in your wardrobe, basically take it, turn it into something else. And yeah, we change it up and we put it on the runway. And then we allow the models to select what they want to wear. Because in the industry, you know, models are just told what to do, what to wear, but we actually give them options. So, you know, they get to do that. They get to accessorize it. Basically, they decide. I basically bring the collection and they figure it out. I'm like, off you go. So they get to have fun because but sometimes they don't really know because they've never had that option because they're like, oh, what do you want us to do? I said, yeah, I don't know, whatever you feel like. So they pretty much work it out. You know, I let them decide who wants to go first on the runway. You know, it's really trying to be inclusive, you know, in the industry and things like that. So that's sort of how that came about. And it was easier for me because you know, becoming hearing impaired, it wasn't because I couldn't do the job. I've been in so many different jobs. Worked at the daycare center, hospitality, all that sort of thing. And yeah, it was pretty much not because I can't do it. It's because I can't hear. So that was my biggest struggle. I can't hear you. It's not that I can't do my job. I just cannot hear what you're saying. And so for me, it was just the easier way to do stuff, just to be creative. And I just sit on my own, do this and everything. And I don't have to listen to people. So that was pretty much why I do what I do, because I don't have to worry about what people are saying to me. I just get on with it and everything. So yeah, that's pretty much how we ended up doing that. And we just sort of grow from there. So yeah, but we are nominated this year for Change Maker of the Year. I think innovative startup in the UK. So we've got quite a few happening this year. So,
and I think that's amazing that you've gone and you've birthed this idea after COVID, after you know, struggling with your hearing loss, and now you're representative at like New York Fashion Week and getting awards or nominated for awards. I think that's an amazing pivot, and just to show that, you know, you're finding out about your hearing disability actually motivated you to find a different area to put your creativity. And I think that's amazing.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And I think, you know, for me personally, I could be sad about so many things. You know, there's so many things that have happened to me, like my parents split up. I've written a book which is called Me Too. I co-authored a book called Me Too, but Never Again, which is about sexual assault. I was in a relationship with a pedophile. I was like 16 and he was 36. So, you know, a lot of stuff has happened to me. I've been evicted from my house. You know, the list goes on, but I choose not to let those bad things, you know, that have happened to just take over my life. Because if I did, then I definitely wouldn't be doing what I do, you know, and especially with my hearing, it took me so much time to grasp it, because when I first, you know, found out I had hearing loss, I was like, I'm not normal. What am I going to do? How am I going to do this, that, and everything? And, you know, the world has changed so much. You know, we've seen it after COVID. It's just completely shifted from the 9 to 5 to doing business online, doing it anywhere in the world. So it's been sort of an advantage in my way. But, you know, of course I would love to have my hearing back, because I could hear pretty much everything. You know, if someone had all the sound up in the room, all the rooms or TV, people, you know, I could hear everything. So I would definitely love to hear again. It's hard having hearing aids because they're still developing so many different styles of technology. Like, they're not waterproof. I love to go swimming, but I have to take them out. You know, when I have a shower, I have to take them out. You know, so things like that. And especially when you live in places like London or New Zealand, it rains all the time. So it's not like the beanie itself is waterproof. You have to think about all these sort of things. And, you know, sometimes people don't really realize that sort of struggle. And even I'm at university, some universities have it's basically a sign on the door, and it's an ear, and it has a line through it, which basically means there's a hearing loop in this particular room. But no, not all universities have this particular thing. I was impressed with Victoria University in Wellington in New Zealand, where they had a hearing loop system, and it connects. There's basically this device that connects to your hearing aids, that connects to the whole section of the uni and everything, which is pretty amazing. But not all universities are like that. So that was another struggle that I have, because I love learning and I love doing in-class, you know, classes and stuff, but it was just too much for me because I couldn't hear.
So leading on from that, like, has that affected, you know, your travels? Because I know myself, when I've been in airports, I really struggle sometimes to hear those airport announcements. They always seem to be muffled and not very clear. Have there been any points you've found or you've noticed a difference in your travels with your hearing loss?
It's a good question. I should really pay more attention. I probably to pay more attention to food and stuff. But so far from what I've noticed, yeah, I think sometimes with the announcements, it's muffled, especially if there's like gate changes. But I'm always, because I've grown up in that way where you had to learn how to observe around you, you had to learn how to, so I think that's sort of been a way to help me travel because I've learned to pay attention fast and I sort of, that sort of thing. So I'm like, oh yeah, what's the gate? Is the gate moved? What's happening? So it sort of balances out a little bit, but then, sometimes it's muffled. And I even had one friend who speaks super softly. They were literally standing next to me and I couldn't hear them. And I'm like, they're like, oh, do you need me to repeat it again? I'm like, no, go away. And, I've learned to lip read. And that was the hardest thing about COVID. Everybody had to have a mask. So, and those screen things at the counter. I'm like, what's this ridiculous screen thing for? I can't hear you. So it's been a bit of a change and, to figure out how to do stuff. But I'm managing, so it's getting there.
Yeah, and I suppose like what you just said, because you've grown up like learning to watch for cues, and I suppose that's us you've got to learn to rely on all your senses, and I know, especially like if you're in a foreign country and you don't know the language, you can't rely on those announcements anyway, because they might not be if your language is English in English. So you have to watch for other cues. And I suppose, do you think from your travels, you've got a really good sense of observation, or you've got a natural curiosity anyway to like see those things?
Yeah, definitely. So I was in France last year, and my French isn't like all that. I got the basics, but I was in the grocery store, and I didn't realize the grocery store, the machine, it talks to you in another language. So it turns out it speaks French, German, Spanish, and English. And I'm like, what's that noise? So I don't know what's going on. I'm like, okay, so I realized it has the flags down there. And because I've lived and traveled everywhere, I was taught all my flags and, capitals and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, mainly flags. And I've always been a visual person. So I was like, oh, that's what it's saying to me. So sometimes I just muck around. I'm like, oh, it's in German. So just play around. I'm like, okay, maybe better stick to English. But no, so I've sort of learned how to do things like that. But I had a situation with the lady at the counter. So I overcalculated how much I spent and I needed to go back to the house, which is only around the corner, but there's no Wi-Fi in the grocery store. So I said to the lady, and she was lovely. She doesn't speak one word of English. So I said, home? I'm like, I'll come back. And then she didn't really understand because I was probably speaking so fast in English and she's looking at me going, and I'm like, huh? And then we figured it out. So I eventually went back to the house, come back. And then I didn't, normally I have a phrase book, but I didn't have one at the time. And obviously now there's Google Translate. So I just typed it, copy, paste, screenshot, and then basically ran back down to the store and then got all the ingredients that I needed and then just showed her. And then we both just started laughing because basically I thought she had Google Translate on her phone, but she didn't have any data. And so we're both we're both sort of like, yeah, there's no Wi-Fi, there's no data, that sort of thing. And then eventually we got the message across, but we both sort of just laughed it off and then just carried on with our day. So, it's just stuff like that. And I think people nowadays miss the concept of, they're afraid to make a mistake. Whereas when you travel, it's okay to make a mistake. We lived in China. Where we lived, no one spoke English. And my dad thought I spoke Chinese because when we lived in Malaysia, they teach Mandarin and Bahasa, which is the main language of Malaysia. And so Dad was like, oh, she speaks Chinese, we'll be fine. And then we get to China and Dad's like, oh yeah, go on. And I'm like, hey. He's like, really? I paid for this? And like, but we were at the KFC, and KFC, if you've been to the KFC, you'll see they've got pictures of different foods up there. Yeah. So Mum and I would just point to what we wanted, and they understood everything, and we managed to get the order. So, there's so many different ways to communicate, and I think that's the joy that we've experienced growing up, was really about just trying, and if you get it wrong, it's okay. We'll figure it out later, and, just laugh it off. And so, yeah, I think that's really one of the advantages I've had as a child, just really experiencing communication, whereas now it's completely different. People are just Google Translate, or, then, and I'm not saying, of course, this doesn't apply to everybody. If you try, I think personally from what I've seen, if you try to say something in another language, people are sort of, that it'll sort of break the ice a bit more. They'll talk to you a bit more. So
I think learning like please, thank you, yes, no, hello, goodbye in the local language doesn't matter where you go. I mean, I think I can ask for a beer in multiple countries, but it's really important, I think, and it just shows you are trying to make an effort. I mean, and your pronunciation might not be any good. My English pronunciation is pretty shocking, but it just shows that you're making an effort, and people, it goes a long way. I've seen it, it does go a long way when they know that you're trying. And I think, like you said, there was a time we didn't have Google Translate or any of this, but you manage. And I know on our recent trip to Cuba, there was just a really neat memory I have of some of the ladies that came with me, and they were staying in a local casa, which is with a family, like a homestay, and they were all out on the porch, and it was mum and the kids and the older kids, and they're all crowded around these two Kiwi ladies. They didn't know Spanish and they didn't know English, but they were looking through family photos, and then the Kiwi ladies were showing them their family photos on their phone. So they might not have been able to use language as such, but they found a commonality in sharing family photos. And I think that was really special.
yeah, definitely. And I think that's the hardest thing about today, that we've lost that interest to try. I think we're so dependent on technology that we've forgotten how to do the things that we were able to do, a long time ago before all this came about, so it'll be interesting to see how it evolves in the future and where it goes.
And like, from all your experiences living abroad, like I think we touched on in our conversation earlier, there's a difference between living abroad and just traveling. I mean, you get a totally different experience because you're immersed, obviously, in the culture. And, are there any tips you'd give to people, especially around slow travel? I think people, it's all about this country count, trying to visit as many countries as you possibly can, but that doesn't mean you're really experiencing a place. So is there some advice you'd give about, how to experience a place or really get to know a culture better?
Yeah, me personally, I love going with people who are from that country because it's safe. One, it breaks down the language barrier, especially if it's like a tonal language barrier. Like when we were in Thailand, so my friend was the groom, and his missus is Thai, but I didn't speak any Thai. He doesn't speak any Thai. And Thai is it's so tonal because it's all about sound. But, basically she was the translator, and especially because we went to her village, no one up there speaks any English, so she was sort of like the mediator between it all, even though we would try and everything. But I think it's definitely one of the safest ways to travel because they're there, you're there. They understand, they can sort of help with the language barrier. They can also sort of bring the price down a bit, because let's be honest, if they see some foreigners, they're going to be like, oh, the price goes up, which isn't bad, but obviously, some foreigners, or we could say all, maybe we do like it at a certain price and that sort of thing. But, it's just simple things like that. But I think it's definitely one of the safest ways to travel.
Yeah.
And, especially with the food, you don't really know, for me personally, I just eat anything. But I know some people aren't like that. They're very picky. So, at least if you've got that friend, they can tell you what's this, what's that. And especially things on what not to do, what to do, because sometimes as travelers, we get too excited and we're like, oh, we're going to just go do this. But we forget that we probably shouldn't, whatever the case may be, do not do that.
Yeah.
And I think other tips are definitely and it's a skill. It's easy for me to say be observant, but, not everybody is observant, but it's a skill that you have to really develop. And I think, because we had lived in a time where we didn't have technology, we lived in a time where we communicated without it, so for me, it's a different story. But I think if you're observant more, and when I say observant, it's more of like, watch what's happening around you. I know now everybody's on their phone when they walk somewhere. They're always on their phone, like they just bump into you. Like, what are you doing? That sort of thing. But, if you're actually off your phone, you can see more, you can see what's happening around you. And, it's not just about what people are doing, but it's just, how they act, how they behave, you can read the body language, that sort of things, and I think the biggest thing is, don't be afraid to try. I think that's the biggest thing, that people are so afraid to do something because they're going to get it wrong. It's not as if you're getting it wrong intentionally. You're learning, especially if you're new to that country, you're learning. And I've had friends who are from Africa. So my friend's from Ghana. Now in Ghana, when they talk, I haven't been to Ghana personally, but when just been being around her and a lot of Ghanaian people, they would say something like, please no. And I'm like, why does she keep saying please? Like, what does that mean? But basically it's sort of like a sign of respect where they're sort of like, no, like it's almost like as if they're saying, no, I don't want to. It's like, see, I can't even translate it.
Like nah in New Zealand. We've got nah, which means yes and no.
Yeah. So, but it's sort of something that you just have to really, I guess be aware of, because when you step outside your country, you are a representative of your country. That is the biggest reflection that people, I think, miss the point. People are like, oh, I can go anywhere I feel like. Yeah, you can. But you also have to keep in mind that the rules are different. The rules are applied different. And even if we talk about, for example, people say, the way women dress. Now, there's, I'm not against bikinis, all that sort of stuff, whatever. But, there's certain things that like you just do not wear a bikini into a temple, put a shirt on, put some clothes on. Yeah, even, I know people do it in Bali, and I know Bali is very touristy, but you still, your representatives, keep in mind that you're representing your people, even though, I guess it's really hard because in the West, and I hate to sort of break it that way, but in Western society, it's really about me, myself, and I. Whereas in Asian cultures, we have been programmed to sort of think about, and it sounds so strange to Western people sometimes. They're like, oh, why do you care about what other people think? It's for that exact reason, it's basically you're representing your family, your people, or whatever the case may be. It's really about that. It has nothing, it's a reflection of who you are, and so it's that sort of thing. Even though, okay, we've changed a little bit in society, but it still applies because you are a tourist in another country, so you should be aware of what you're doing.
I think that's really relevant. I've really noticed that in a lot of, real cultural countries where you are supposed to behave a certain way because you are representing the village, your family, your community. And I think Western societies used to have that, it was a thing, you needed to behave a certain way because you wouldn't want to bring shame on your family. And I know that sounds really old fashioned, but I think the way you worded it is you're representing your country and where you're from, and that we should show respect no matter where we are. And it's a bit like someone coming into your home. If you invite someone into your house, you expect them to be polite and courteous and grateful. You don't expect them to come in and just lay on your couch and start eating all your food and chucking shit on the floor. So it's, you've got to, it is, really important to be respectful. We touched that on the episode just before about, the way you dress. And I think even though we, women's rights and everything, and I totally agree with all that, but you still have to be culturally aware of every country that you're going to.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to go to Bali. I've not been to Bali. I hear people talk about it a lot, but I know a lot of Aussies do go to Bali.
Aussies,
And the problem I have, obviously, I know it's media, it hypes it up a bit, but there's always issues about Aussies doing something wrong in Bali. And I just am like, it reflects on all of us because not all of us are like that. And it's hard. And, it's the same when people sort of criticize Americans. They're like, oh, Americans are like this or whatever. But not all of them are like that. So, and it's so hard sometimes when, you want to go do this. And I mean, I'll eventually get to Bali one day. But, it's just that sort of thing where it's like, I just don't want to be thrown into that category because I'm not like that or, whatever the case may be. And I'm sure there might be other people who feel that way. I think that's the hardest thing is that you're not responsible for other people's behaviors.
No, absolutely not. Do you find because of your mixed heritage that you've been treated any differently in certain countries?
Yeah, it's the most oddest thing. Like I said, I'm pretty much born and bred in Australia. Like I'm pretty much raised as an Aussie kid. So when I go home to the Philippines, I'm sort of like out there and I'm just, whereas in the Philippines, it is still patriarchal. It's still very conservative, still very religious. So, me just wandering around, my aunt's sort of like, Shauna looks at me going, oh, this doesn't seem normal, and so me and my mom, we always get into a fight. Every time we go Philippines, we always get into a fight. Like, doesn't matter what it is. And then obviously we have the argument in front of the family, which you're not supposed to do. And obviously my aunt doesn't really understand, because she's always been like protective of her kids and stuff, even though she's got boys. But, she doesn't really understand that since I've grown up here, we have the opportunity to do this, that, and the other. Like if I was, lived in the Philippines and stuff, I probably have a bunch of kids right now. You know what I mean? Like I have, probably been married, all this sort of stuff, because culturally it's not normal. And I think some of the biggest ones though is that because even though I am an Australian, so I am very outspoken and that sort of thing. But because I'm brown and, racism is everywhere, but it's the weirdest thing sometimes because my dad is Caucasian. And I remember him saying to me when I was a baby, we lived in Hong Kong and someone had said to my dad, this lady and her baby's in the elevator. They didn't realize that that was my dad. And so he threw them out of the elevator because he was like, that's my wife and that's my daughter, that sort of thing. So there's been things like that. And I don't think it really hit me until I moved to Australia where someone said, go home. And I was like, go home? Where? Like, so it's the weirdest thing, because it's just like, I didn't really realize people can say that. And because my parents are from two different backgrounds, it was just that sort of thing that I'd never really heard of. And I was like, so it really gave me an understanding into, people who are darker than me, Indigenous people, how they're treated, that sort of thing. So I was like, whereas, growing up, I never really thought about it, and so, it's sometimes funny because sometimes people have this thing like, oh, you can't afford it or, you run a business, that sort of thing. I'm like, so I've always sort of programmed myself. That's why I enjoy doing everything. I always just was one of the people that wanted to try everything just because I can say that to somebody who was sort of be like, oh, you've done this, now I get the thing where people are like, oh, I thought you were older because you've done quite a lot, whereas
that's what I said.
Yeah. Whereas a lot of the people, I guess my age, haven't done half of the stuff that I've done. So everybody's like, oh, I'm like, yeah, no, I'm just a overachiever. I don't know, I just wanted to try new stuff.
I think it's amazing, like the fact that you've packed so much in, and it was, it was actually a compliment because a lot of people can go through their entire lives and maybe even only have one career they're not even happy in. So the fact that you've managed and you've decided to, take every opportunity, I think is amazing. And it's a message for everybody. It doesn't matter what their age is. I think that's the most important thing is whether you're 35 or 65, that if you see a door open, jump through it and, take those opportunities when they come up.
Yeah, definitely. I had a friend gift me, well, we're not friends anymore, but my mum thought it was an insult, to be honest. But she gifted me a book. It said, been there, done that. Like it literally, and I said, well, I don't know. I guess I can say that, can't I? I mean, there's nothing that I haven't done or haven't tried. So, and I think that was pretty much from my dad's side, was like, try everything. If you don't like it, you're not going to do it again. And that's how I felt about bungee jumping. I'm not doing that again. That was once enough for me, because that was off the Auckland Bridge and they were really good up there. But yeah, no, I was like, okay, I'm good.
And I mean, that's sort of where we'll lead on to as we wind up this episode. I just have some quick fire questions because I think we could keep talking. There's so many subjects we can talk about. No, it's great. But I sort of wanted to ask you these questions, and I'm just going to fire a few at you, and I'm sure you're going to have some interesting answers. So what has been the most rewarding part of solo travel for you?
Just meeting people. I enjoy, meeting so many different people, and there's so many. I think that's the good thing about travel, is that you can connect with anybody. Doesn't matter what their age is, there is something you can connect with. I met a girl who she's pretty much the opposite of me. She's just incredible. We're around the same age, but she's a brain surgeon. She's like this marathon runner, owns a house, the whole 9 yards, stuff that I was like, that would be cool to do if I had, the brain to do it. And if I was like that, she was pretty much what I would describe as my mum's daughter if she had that child, but she and I could connect over mums and how they were. So basically both of us she's from the UK, but she's of a ethnic heritage. She's Pakistani. And obviously I'm, from Australia and everything. So both of us could relate to how our mums act and how their mums are sort of like, oh, your kids are so Western. And it's like, but you brought us here to be, so we have that sort of common ground where we can talk about that. Otherwise, I could not talk to you about brain surgery or nothing like that, nothing. But, that's how we connected. So I think that's definitely one of my things about, traveling, connecting with people.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that too. I've found it exactly the same. This is a really good one because you sort of briefly touched on it as well. What is the most unusual thing you've eaten while traveling?
Yeah, when I was in Thailand, I wasn't paying attention. I was on my phone, typical me. This new modern...
Especially as we talked about people not paying attention and being on their phones.
That was pretty much my issue. So the bride that I stayed with, the family, they were fantastic. They fed me stuff, and I was not watching. I looked in again. I'm like, oh, it's flies. So it's flies mixed with, I don't even know how it was cooked, but I think it's mixed with some sauce or something like that. And you eat it with a rice. And I was like, so I basically was on my phone texting, and I just took whatever was there. And then I looked in and I'm like, what is that? I'm like, is that what I think it is? Yeah. So I looked at that and I was like, oh, well, there you go. I mean, they were tasty. Yeah. So I'm like, no, not for me. I'm good. And and another one is, so in the Philippines, it's very popular. Everyone seems to know what it's called. It's called balut, which is basically this egg. It's basically a fetus of this. Yeah.
Chinese eat it as well as...
And a friend got this for me. So in Asia, whenever someone gives you something, you can't really say no because it's an insult. So you have to close with this thing. You have to close it. You have to close your eyes and eat it. So I just put it in my mouth. I'm like, okay. And I'm chewing and chewing. I'm like, what the hell is that? I don't know what it was, but I don't know if it was the beak or something. I could feel something hard. And I'm like, okay. So that was, definitely that. That's not for me.
So you ate it?
Yeah, I had to eat it. So, but I spit the bones out, but I was like, no, not again.
I've seen those yet because it's a Chinese thing as well. Yeah, it's the actual feet. Yeah. Oh my God, you're brave. I couldn't do that. That's so funny. And then this is what is your favorite road trip song?
Road trip song?
Or your airplane song? Your on the road song? Have you got one?
I don't know, actually. I used to do road trips all the time. This was when I had a CD. One of the girls made a CD and I just drive it. So I would drive from Townsville to Cairns, which is only 4 hours. But no, it was just a whole bunch of CDs, really. But I don't know I've got one.
Oh, you'll have to keep us posted and share it to me later.
Yeah.
You'll have to get yourself an anthem now.
Yes, definitely. We've been a music lover since I was a kid, really. But because my parents are from, such different backgrounds, but music has always been in our house. Even in all our, camcord videos, all the videos that we've got on CD, VCR of just music being blasted in the house, really. So we pretty much listen to everything in our house. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And then this is the last question. If you could time warp to anywhere in the world at any period, where would it be and why? So if you could go back in time to anywhere in the world in any year and period, where would it be?
Definitely hanging out with my grandma. I love my grandma. So I was the only grandchild that lived overseas, and we would go to the Philippines, into the country. But my grandma, I think she was 98 when she passed away, but she loved to dance. So we would always blast music and just dance. My uncle had a bunch of, it's a stereo, but it was all cassettes back in the day. So you had to fast forward, rewind, that sort of thing. But we just love to dance and stuff. And we always just dance around with my grandma and everything. But there was one particular time where my cousin, he must have been 5, him and his best friend. So my mum wanted to smack him. He did something naughty. And so my grandma's like, no, I'll do it. So there's this elderly lady running around the house with a big stick, and these little kids just running around the house. This goes on for about 5-10 minutes. And so then they decide to go around the other way. So basically this elderly lady chasing these kids around the house, and Mum and I just laughing. And then they went off out into the paddock, and Mum was like, oh, quick, she's coming back in. Don't look at her. Don't look at her. So Mum looked up outside the window, and I'm looking up in the ceiling because Grandma stopped right in front of our door. And we could just feel her eyes just looking at us for laughing at her. And then she walked away. But no, that's definitely one of the things. And also my grandma was the first person up. We call her Grandma Lola in the Philippines. That's what it means. And so once she got up, you could hear her pumping the water. Once she got up, you had to get up. You could not be sleeping. So definitely hanging out with my grandma. She was definitely, something, because she never forgot who I was. And I think that was the biggest, thing for me.
That's really beautiful. I love that. That's just such a nice way to sort of round off this episode. And part of the episodes is to have a pass the parcel question for each guest. So have you got a question to pass on to the next guest we can do?
Okay, so the question is, if you've traveled before technology, what do you miss about it? And if you haven't, what is something that you have benefited from with technology?
And I think that sort of wraps up into what we were talking about. So I absolutely love it. I've really enjoyed this conversation, Frances, and I really appreciate your time joining us.
No worries, and thank you. And hopefully, I do need to come back to New Zealand, but hopefully we will meet somewhere on the planet.
I hope so. And I'm going to put everywhere to find Frances in the comments and in the description below. But in the meantime, stay tuned for the next episode. And remember, it's never too late to unleash your wanderlust.
Thanks for listening. Please share the love by liking, commenting, or subscribing, or join us in our Facebook community.